Hi. So, welcome to my talk. I'm going to talk about the political tragedy of data-driven determinism. I have two guests here, recording in my living room with two friends. One of them, one of them I lived with for all of my life. The other one almost. So let's start. I'm going to talk a bit about. I just ask for quiet in the living room. I'm going to talk a bit about the future and the way we're thinking about the future, the way we're framing the future, what data has to do with that, and I'm going to argue for political imagination. Let's start. So my name is Mushon. I'm a designer. And I'll go on and say we're going to start with speaking about what do I mean by data-driven determinism. Then I'll discuss a couple of models for future thinking, and then I'm going to argue we should cancel the apocalypse. So data-driven determinism. Since the dawn of Western culture, and not even only Western culture, it was a fight of man versus destiny. It's a recurring narrative. Attempts to reverse the oracle leads to tragedy. And we've grown to think about the past as a narrative, something that we've experienced. We experience it as a story. And then when we're trying to think about the future is just the rest of the story that we haven't heard yet. So that's kind of determinism expects a single irreversible future that is modeled after the past. So just continuing that line. But today we want data. We want a political debate based on facts, on an agreeable, rational, common ground, especially in the light of filter bubbles, fake news, and climate denialism. Future-proof our public policy with science, right? Prediction algorithms are modern-day oracles. They extrapolate patterns and trends from the past into the future. And just to say that in my own work as a designer, I visualize predictions of traffic to ease pressure on the roads, and predictions of energy consumption to help lead a more efficient and clean energy ecosystem, and data-driven insights of the built environment. So I'm not in any way a prediction algorithm hater, but I do have some questions about how we've adopted them into many facets of our lives, specifically politics. So in a way, data and kind of rational predictions have also become the ethics of the liberal left. Show me the data, right? If it's vote Remain or the Hillary Clinton campaign. Public policy informed by numbers, politics as science. And you can see it also with the way the discussion of the 2016 elections in the US were framed. Numbers informed the political campaign. And a few weeks before the US elections, this is how the data-driven political debate looked like. So, in a way, what we're seeing is that this is not standing for a different future. This is, in a way, standing for the status quo. The argument of both the Remain campaign and the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2016 was voting for the status quo, continuing what we have, because this is pretty much as good as it gets. While when we're looking at the rhetoric in the right, we see if it's in the Brexit, in the Leave camp, the language of the right is language of change, of political agency. And we can see even with Trump, we want a future, vote Trump, right? The progressive movement's slogan used to be another world is possible. In a way, it seems like this is what the right has been saying rather than the left. Or rather, maybe what the right is saying, fuck the status quo. Or maybe another world, we used to say another world is possible, right? But data-driven determinism is inherently conservative. The patterns and trends of the past will continue into the future. It assumes history would simply repeat itself. So based on the data we gathered and analyzed, another world is unlikely. Statistics is always the science of uncertainty, but culturally it has transformed into an oracle. We've become submissive to likelihood. There's a certain false dichotomy, and you know, this is how the last hours of the campaign looked like before Trump was finally declared the winner. It's kind of a false dichotomy between the status quo and reactionism, but it is a false dichotomy, and I'll try to argue that through models for future thinking. So let's consider a couple of them. So one of them is reactionism. Reactionism is indeed resisting the status quo, but not through a vision of the future, but through a false idealization of the past. Another model is techno-determinism. It's kind of a subset of data-driven determinism. And the great proponent of that is Ray Kurzweil, and his argument for the exponential growth as kind of the vehicle to deliver us from the past. When we're looking at how technological determinism argues for salvation through technology, we can see titles that mix both technology and the market, right? What technology wants, the singularity is near, the world is flat, and the inevitable, right? Technology and the way it's intertwined with the market is just not something that we can resist. It's already decided for us in a way. It's dominating the popular imagination and covered in an allure of cutting-edge science and economics, whether it be digital technology, biology, or economics, depoliticizing, dehumanizing, and unapologetically too often simply wrong. At the heart of what it represents is this pessimistic algorithmic optimism. They're optimistic about the algorithm and pessimistic about life. Algorithms' question of agency versus efficiency, and neural networks are mostly model-less black boxes. We don't really know what's going on inside them. They allow us to outsource excess cognitive processes. Like we no longer remember phone numbers. That's not a big loss. We may no longer know how to drive, arguably a good thing too. My main concern is the de-skilling of our political imagination. We are forgetting how to imagine better futures. But we love imagining the futures, right? Dystopias are probably one of the most popular forms of fiction. They're critical, often the resistance stories of those who lost what we have today. But I don't think it's really what we're looking for. The timely reemergence of the Handmaid's Tale might remind us how dystopian can reactionary utopias become, especially these days. It inspires activism, resistance, critical examination of radical ideologies. There's, in a way, a race to the bottom to identify the marks of which literary dystopia we're currently living in. Is it Orwellian 1984? Or maybe Huxley's Brave New World? Or maybe it's some kind of Philip K. Dick dystopia. And while we can appreciate the critical sentiment or the rhetoric, are we simply content with the reactionary notion of going backwards to our imagined past greatness? Was the past really so great for America or for gender equality? Climate change is another form of data-driven dystopia. Its terminology is similar: inevitability, resilience. Dystopia marks a dark future. It asks us to appreciate what we have, to not take it for granted. It kind of reminds us of the saying attributed to Lenin, "The worse, the better." In that argument was the argument that to reach the communist utopia, we first had to ruin everything that was there. You need to go through dystopia. You need to go through destruction to actually get to utopia. But when it comes to climate change, I don't think we have that option, right? If we go that way, wait for it. Keynote effect in 3, 2, 1. We don't have that option. We need to think beyond dystopias. Dystopias are in fact conservative by definition, like data-driven determinism. They are a failure of the imagination. They are a flawed model. We cannot hope to get to utopia through dystopia. We don't have that option with the world. We have to find a way to get there in some other way. And that's why I argue we should cancel the apocalypse. There are many cruel and routine lies we tell to children. But perhaps the most indicative is this: if you tell anyone your wish, it won't come true. This quote by Laurie Penny really drives the message home. In a way, we're too ashamed to speak about getting to a better place. And we're too concerned that if we let our children say that, we'll have to deal with their disappointment rather than help them achieve their actual hopes. Utopia by Thomas More from 1516 was an island of abundance where private possession was abolished. Why is it so hard to say what we wish for? Dystopia is what we may lose, but utopia is what we may gain. Behavioral economics teaches us that we are risk averse. We hate to lose twice as much as we love to win. Dystopia is easier. Like data-driven determinism, it is conservative, based on of conserving what we have against the dangers of losing. These are two Steves, Steve Lambert and Stephen Duncombe, from the Center for Creative Activism. And in the workshops, they teach activists and artists to use art and activism in order to win, to learn how to win. One of the things they teach in one of their methodologies is they're asking the participant to imagine how would winning look like. So activists may say, we will pass this legislation, or maybe we would block that project. And they said, oh yeah, that sounds great. And then what? Oh, we haven't thought of that. And then we will go on and maybe, try to define another vision for the city. That's great. And then what? And then what? And then what? At some point, it does become a bit, it sounds like fantastic or science fiction-y, but it does define a utopia. It does define a direction we're going towards, something that we really wanted to have. And maybe that would actually affect the way we build our tactics if we have a strategy that is informed by utopia. Naomi Klein also adopted this approach in a book that is very aptly titled "No is Not Enough." Resisting is maybe noble, but it's not enough. Like dystopia is not enough. She talks of utopia, and she takes a case study, the Leap Manifesto. This is where a couple of different progressive organizations in Canada have gathered together around different causes, but the idea was that no agenda is more important than the other. Climate change, financial inequalities, ending racism, political reform, all of them are important, but none of them would cancel the other. I really recommend checking it out on leapmanifesto.org. There's a new and emerging science fiction genre called solarpunk. It started in Brazil, and unlike cyberpunk, it's unabashedly optimistic. It describes a future where technology and the environment are not at odds. Solar energy and the distributed grid as an infrastructure become an inspiration for sharing power also on a political level. The kind of images and maybe the visions in its early days might seem a bit kitschy, but there's something very powerful about the argument that we could actually have a future that we could talk about climate change in a way that would create a vision that we want to strive towards. And I know what you're thinking. This is also a form of utopia. So is this one. So is this one. And the Islamic State is another form of utopia. In a way, like one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, you could say that one man's dystopia is another man's utopia. And yes, it's usually men. This is where I encounter a book by Peter Phrase called Four Futures, which tried to present a slightly more complex scenario planning. He wrote Four Futures, and he calls this book a social science fiction. The methodology he used is taking two axes. One he calls the economic axis between scarcity and abundance, and the other one is the political axis between equality and hierarchy. And he gave a title for each one of the quadrants that is created through overlaying these two axes. One is communism. Hunch, this is the one he's definitely for. Another one is rentism, socialism, and exterminism. Each one of them is different. Each one of them has its reference both in life as we know them today and in science fiction. The methodology is very powerful and exciting because it describes the future as not a single but a plural, and a plane of possibilities that we may be able to affect. This is also what drove us in 2016 to launch Designing Tomorrow as a collaboration between the Berlin-based Republica conference and the Tel Aviv-based Utopia Festival. We use science fiction scenarios as a methodology for developing proactive future policy. We're using methodologies like backcasting, and most scenarios we went through catastrophe as a precursor for a desirable future, and that was alarming. In Republica, we decided, in Republica 18, we decided to cancel the apocalypse. This is from a workshop in Republica in 2018. We ran a For Futures workshop there, together with Peter Fraze, by the way. And we continue developing these techniques. Just last week, I ran a workshop as a part of NANUA. NANUA is a smart mobility initiative that focuses on public interest policy in Israel. We defined 5 game changers in the field of smart mobility and suggested 25 policy recommendations. To launch the initiative, I am currently leading this set of speculative workshops, where participants from local and national government and NGOs identify uncertainties, extend them into axis and For Futures and backcasting scenarios, and then present them to each other as a basis for direction. Me and my organization and the organization I work for are committed to affecting this future in the foreseeable, starting tomorrow, basically. On a more creative, artistic side of this practice, there's a project called Speculative Tourism. We started it in Jerusalem, a city whose futures often seem too scary to even consider. We invited different authors, and we launched 8 different tours through 8 different futures from Jerusalem, using GPS-enabled mobile app, and presented as audio tours of the city's futures. While Sarah Beninga walked us through a future where Jerusalem's Palestinian community is relegated to a futuristic underground city, Boaz Lavi snuck us into the Zuckerberg's family last goodbye trip from Jerusalem before leaving Earth for Mars. Yael Bartana described the future of an androgynous redemption, and Muhammad Beiruti and Meron Rappaport showed us how would it feel to walk in the shared capital of 2 states with open borders. Other authors include Hagit Keisar, Racheli Ibenboim, and others. And they explored the futures of the refugee question, women's rights, and spiritual doubts. We also ran workshops in New London, Connecticut, in Arad, in Israel, and the next speculative tourism project will address issues of Mediterranean rising sea levels. We are currently looking for potential collaborators on this one, so ping me about that if you're interested. Finally, I want to talk about attractors and detractors. We use dystopias to make sure we should use dystopias to make sure we're not lost on our way, and we should use utopias as guiding lights. We should build a more complex model. So dystopias mark what we should stay away from, but not where we should go. Utopias attract us and align us towards a shared goal, but that itself might feel a bit too aligned. What we need to develop is this complex model. Use utopias to show us the way, and use dystopias to make sure we steer us in the right direction through the process. This is not some Luddite position against data and algorithms, quite the contrary. So far, we've only scratched the surface with neural networks that extrapolate the status quo. We might be able to use them to define attractors and detractors, and allow us to decode the process towards these desired futures. So unlike the past, which we can mine for data and analyze for insights, the future simply doesn't exist. We always have futures, plural. We should consider the probable, the possible, the desirable. We should imagine attractors and detractors, utopias and dystopias. We should use data to inform decisions, not to dictate them. We should use automation to extend autonomy, not limit it. We should reclaim our political imagination. I would leave you with this quote. She's on the horizon. I go 2 steps, she moves 2 steps away. I walk 10 steps and the horizon runs 10 steps ahead. No matter how much I walk, I'll never reach her. What good is utopia? That's what. It's good for walking. Thank you.